I ended my lecture on realism with this Daumier lithograph. Now, as we move into photography, I want to take up the question that Daumier raised and in some way mocked in this caricature. Was photography truly art? Did it threaten to replace traditional art? Since the Italian Renaissance, painters had struggled to create an illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional plane. They employed perspective, chiaroscuro, subtle modulations of color, added down. Then along came photography, which could accomplish many of the same feat using light, chemicals, and one of the Industrial Revolution's infernal machines. Nature could be reproduced close to perfectly. So did this bring art closer to nature and therefore create a truer art? This painter says yes. When I found the quotation, I got curious and looked up his work. Delacroix was a successful Academy painter who specialized in large-scale history paintings. Here's an example. Notice how carefully he has tried to capture the cloth realistically, but not really any more realistically, I would argue, than Jan van Eyck accomplished in the 1400s. And now we hear from our friend the Romantic painter Delacroix. In this quote, at least, he claimed to find photography false for a rather odd reason. A photograph puts in everything without making artistic choices. By the way, a realist painter such as Courbet would embrace this aspect of photography. Remember that in Stonebreakers, Courbet deliberately avoided creating a focal point. Every detail mattered, and no detail seemed to matter more than any of the others. Delacroix disagreed. And yet, Delacroix was actually one of the first painters to embrace photography as an artist's tool. Delacroix formed a collaborative partnership with a photographer, Eugène Derieux. Delacroix posed the models, Derieux photographed the models, and Delacroix in turn sketched the models. Here's one example. Here's another Delacroix stage photograph. Note the dramatic lighting and the carefully draped cloth. And who is Delacroix channeling here? Hard to miss the similarity to our Odalisque. The painting on the left is also by Ingres. The guy was really into backs. And here is a famous photo of Delacroix by our buddy Nadar next to a Delacroix self-portrait. So what do you think? Which one seems to you to offer more insight into the painter? And now, alas, I need to get a little technical. We've already talked about the camera obscura and how artists, including Vermeer, used it to help them capture reality in paint. Around the year 1800, Thomas Wedgwood made the first known attempt to capture an image in a camera obscura by means of a light-sensitive substance. He used paper or white leather treated with silver nitrate. The images this produced were very faint and they didn't last. It was Louis Daguerre, who's pictured on the right, who overcame some of these problems and figured out a technique for fixing an image permanently onto a silver surface plate. It was a very complicated and time-consuming process, as this video clip from the Getty Museum demonstrates. I really don't think you need to know all these details, but I want you to have a sense of its complexity. You do need to know that the process required very long exposure times and that it produced only one non-reproducible image. It's easy to see from this still life, which is one of our required works, why artists such as Delacroix and Delacroix proclaimed at least some of the products of this new technology as art. Many art photographers still like to work in black and white because of the extraordinary play of light and shadow and the three-dimensional illusionistic modeling that black and white photos could create. What was the other huge advantage of a still life? These objects did not have to stand still through the long exposure times. They were blessedly inanimate. Note the very deliberate similarity to a Dutch Baroque Vanitas painting. This is photography definitely trying to imitate art, not to capture a moment in time or a particular expression. It very much involves the choices that Delacroix thought were necessary for true art. This tradition lives on in art photography, but it did not take full advantage of photography's potential to capture real life. But on with our technology story. After reading early reports of Daguerre's invention, William Henry Fox Talbot succeeded in creating stabilized photographic negatives in 1835. And why is that important? They could be used to produce multiple copies. Nadar used the Webb collodion process, which means he had to develop his photos up in the balloon. No wonder his hat blew off. According to Wikipedia, Nadar experienced problems caused by the chemical action on the plates of gas escaping from the balloon. And here's his self-portrait, also made using this process. Here are a few more of his portraits, including a second and much more impish self-portrait. Journalists, not surprisingly, left at photography's ability to capture breaking news. The war in Crimea was the first to be recorded photographically, and suddenly a faraway war's bloody battlefields moved into people's homes. This famous photo shows an early operation performed under ether. Note the blurred figures, there was some motion during exposure, and the vantage point, which is from the gallery above. This aerial view flattens the spatial perspective in a way that would intrigue impressionists. Stay tuned. While some photographs were taken in Crimea, the American Civil War was the first to be quite thoroughly documented on film. This photo by Timothy O'Sullivan is the most reproduced photograph of the Civil War. He used to be a College Board favorite, but he's fallen off the list. I love the story behind this photo, which is a required work. Leland Stanford, a railroad magnate and former governor of California, argued that at some point in a gallop, all four of a horse's feet left the ground. Urban legend has it that he wagered $25,000 on the proposition, which was serious money in 1878. Most historians, alas, think that this is an embellishment. Anyway, we know that Stanford did enlist the help of a scientist and photographer, Edward Muybridge. Muybridge set up 12 cameras attached to wires, which tripped when a horse crossed them. And here is the result, which proved Stanford's point and helped usher in a 20th century art form, cinema. Here's another set of Muybridge photos on the same theme of bodies in motion. While Muybridge had the greatest impact on cinema, painters also tried to capture some of these scenes of repeated movements. None of the following works is still on the list, and they're all from a later period, but I want you to see them in the context of Muybridge's work. This one's quite famous, if a little silly. Balla was a futurist. I'll say more about that in a future unit. Severini was another futurist. Armored Train is a genuinely creepy painting. Severini deeply admired war and war machines, but for now I just want you to notice his efforts to capture movement over space and time. Futurists love Muybridge's work. This famous painting, stay tuned for Cubism, may actually have been based in part on another Muybridge study, this time an early movie. If you Google the name of this painting and then go to the Wikipedia site, you can see actual film footage of a nude woman descending a staircase. Nude women will feature prominently in my final painter of this unit, Monet.